take one moment, though. We've lost a great friend here in the Boston community just recently. Truly a giant in the community and in politics, as well as in higher ed and healthcare. That's Phil Johnson, former state rep, a Secretary of Health and Human Services under Governor Dukakis, Region 1 Health and Human Service Administrator, trustee, University of Massachusetts. I mean, the list goes on and on. But more importantly, what we always admired about Phil was he was a mentor to so many people who were looking for direction in their careers, whether go into nonprofit, elected office. But he always tried to encourage them to give back, no matter what your title is going to be, to give back and help your neighbor. And he truly was a gentle man and somebody that we all admired. And if we have a moment of silence for Phil Johnson. Thank you. And this coming Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, there'll be a memorial service at the University of Massachusetts and Boston, or we'd like to say Dorchester, if you'd like to come. Then I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our chair of the board of the New England Council. John Heiler is here. We want to thank him and thank him for all his support of the New England Council. And as I said, we're thrilled with this attendance here today. And I know we're all looking forward to hearing from the congressman. And I don't think there's a congressman that is more respected in this country than our speaker here. And you'll hear more about him later. But more importantly, this breakfast has been provided by Dana Farber. Boy, when I think of New England and how we are blessed to have the quality of life that we have here, why we choose to live here, to grow here, our families, and to even retire here, what are the things that keeps all of us here in New England? It's the health care. Dana Farber, number one. People come from all over the world. So we are truly blessed. But if I can just change the topic very quickly, I am aware that the New England Council annual meeting, members meeting, is now called to order. We haven't done this in last year. We haven't done it this past year because we didn't have our annual celebration at the Kennedy Library. So stay with me on this. This won't be painful at all. 10% of the council's members, I think 60 would be appropriate, constitutes a quorum under our bylaws, and we've now surpassed, obviously, the number, so a quorum is now present. A copy of the resolution, the nominating the new directors, was as provided in the meeting notice by our electronic mail on March 11th. It was also available to you for review as you entered the room. So I would like to make a motion to adopt the resolution electing those directors who were now nominated for election. And do I have the question of adopting the resolution be determined by a voice vote with all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. I'm looking. Yeah, okay, good. All right. The ayes have it. Resolutions is adopted. So, no further business coming before the members. The meeting. I would now like to make a motion to adjourn our annual meeting. Do I have a second? Richie, this is the way to run, okay? This is the way. Take notes. No discussion. No discussion. Okay? So, again, I just want to thank all of you. But speaking of thank yous, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and thank you. Not just for what you're doing here this morning, but your membership in the New England Council. When people say, who is a member of the New England Council, we always rattle off Dana-Farber being one of our proud members, to say the least. So we thank you. But we also have a new CEO of Dana-Farber who's here today, and he is going to introduce and give a very formal introduction to our very, very special guest, and that is Dr. Benjamin Ebert. And before he comes up to give his introduction, can I just tell you a couple of things on our agenda for the next couple of weeks. Next Tuesday morning, we have Ayanna Presley, the Congresswoman, speaking at the Hampshire House, the other side of the city. Later this month, we'll hear from Connecticut Representative Joanna Hayes in Washington, D.C. And then in May, we're going to be in Providence. We have a breakfast for the governor there, Governor McKee. And, of course, I hope all of you will be joining us again on May 14th and 15th in Washington, D.C. for our Washington's conference. We usually have 275 New Englanders, all 6 New England states, come down for 2 days of really hearing from prominent members of Congress and the United States Senate, members from the media, members from the executive branch. It'll be truly a 2 days of really informational experience for all of us. So hopefully that anybody here who's not registered, you still have a little time to register. And that's it. And hopefully we thank you again for all the support you give to the New England Council over the years. And we're only as good as our members. So with that, for a formal introduction of our very, very special friend, I'm going to ask the good doctor, Dr. Benjamin Ebert, to give the introduction.
Thank you very much, Jim. So honored to be here. Dana-Farber is so honored to sponsor this breakfast. This is my first time to be part of the New England Council and to join you here. I'm relatively new to my role. I've just been in the role for 6 months, but I've been at Dana-Farber for a long time, been in Boston for a very long time. But Dana-Farber has been around and has been part of this community for an extremely long time. It was founded in 1947, and it is such a part of the healthcare system, such a part of the ecosystem here. I'll just tell you a few words about it. When it was founded, cancer was not talked about. There were really no treatments. Oncology wasn't a field. There weren't real cancer doctors. It was felt to be a pretty hopeless disease. One of the most challenging ones was pediatric leukemias, 100% fatal, no real clues of how to treat it. Sidney Farber started out on using the first types of chemotherapy to get remissions and ultimately combining agents to get the first cures to the stage we are now where over 90% of children with leukemia are cured. And that process has continued with decades and decades of studying the immune system, leading to new therapies that target the immune system in cancer, and now diseases like metastatic melanoma, which were 100% fatal when I trained. Now more than a third of patients with metastatic melanoma are either cured or have many years, decades without any evidence of disease. Multiple myeloma is a disease that was horrible and many complications when I trained. Now there are more than 20 drugs for multiple myeloma, almost all of which were developed at Dana-Farber, leading to myeloma being more of a chronic disease. And even acute myeloid leukemia in adults, which hasn't advanced as far as in children, we have several new drugs developed at Dana-Farber just in the last few years that are after about 25 years of no new drugs for leukemia are now changing the disease again. So this cycle of research, translating it into clinical care, has been going on at Dana-Farber for over 75 years and continues today. Clinically, we do only cancer, so every single patient is special. Every single patient is dealing with a critical juncture in their lives, and everybody gets that level of respect and care. And we've been able to maintain this equal emphasis on clinical care and research. But the only reason that we're able to do that is because of our government funding. The Dana-Farber has been getting funding from the NIH and from the National Cancer Institute really from the beginning. We were one of the very first cancer centers in the country in 1973 when Richard Nixon declared the war on cancer. And all of these discoveries, these drugs, Dana-Farber's been involved in more than half of the FDA-approved drugs that have gone through in the recent years. And that has generated this incredible economy that we have in Massachusetts, where every dollar invested from the NIH leads to $2.46 in economic activity. The venture capital community, the biotech community, the pharmaceutical community. It's the discoveries that enter the private sector. It's the trainees that we train who go and become leaders in these industries. And the NIH is under threat. And that would be devastating for our patients, devastating for our researchers, and devastating for our economy. In addition, our clinical practice is dependent on the federal government. Many of our patients are older. Cancer is a disease of aging, so a huge percentage of our patients are supported by Medicare. Another big chunk of our patients are supported by Medicaid. It's an incredibly important part of our mission to take care of patients regardless of their zip code, wherever they're from, whatever their background. I've been reassured, though, having the opportunity to meet Congressman Neal. I had a chance to go down to Washington early in my time. I'll be going down again soon to meet with leaders. And Congressman Neal has been one of the champions who've really championed both medical research, access to care, expansion of health insurance. And that is essential for Massachusetts, essential for our hospitals, essential for our universities, and for lives everywhere. These discoveries that we make at Dana-Farber or in our ecosystem affect everybody in the United States, affect everybody in the world. These drugs go everywhere, or the standards of care that we develop go everywhere. So we're so appreciative of the leadership of Congressman Neal and his colleagues, and so honored to get to introduce him here today. So Congressman Neal is the dean of our congressional delegation in Massachusetts and in New England. He started as the mayor of Springfield and joined Congress in 1988. He's now the a representative from the 1st Congressional District of Massachusetts. He joined the House Banking Committee for his first 2 terms, and in 1993 joined the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. In 2019, became the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee and remains the ranking member of that committee. So appreciative of the support for all of us, but in particular for biomedical research that supports our ecosystem and our patients, for the support for our health insurance and expanded medical care, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Doctor, for that very generous introduction, and thanks to all of you who are so faithful. My staff will confirm that anytime I get an invitation from the New England Council, I always say, we're accepting it, only too glad to be here. You're people that have broad influence on opinion, which in the end generates activity, and I always think that this is a great way to reach that opinion that I've just described. And a reminder with those generous comments, Doctor, what happens at Dana-Farber is important to the world, not just to those of us in Boston or in Massachusetts. What takes place there for the world. Last night as I came in after another tumultuous day on Capitol Hill, I had a chance staying at the Omni in the Seaport District, and had a chance to take a look at the skyline again, to look at the road improvements, what happened here over the course of my lifetime in my career. And I thought, as the doctor described, the ecosystem that we have here. Stop and think of it. It's the center of finance for the Northeast now. You talk about healthcare. These are the best hospitals and doctors in the world. The creativity and the innovation that comes of biotech investment, all of it has happened in our lifetimes in this city. And it's going to take me into the infrastructure expenditure in a moment. But just before I get to that, the 19th is a signature day in the history of the world as well. And what happened in Concord and Lexington 250 years ago lifted and lit the lamp of liberty for the world. It's an experiment worth having, it's an experiment worth keeping, and it's an experiment worth investing in. Just a few years after that, the Constitution was born, and much of the reason for that Constitution was because of Shays' Rebellion in Springfield. We carefully mark what happened at Shays' Rebellion when that army that came from Pelham, Massachusetts, and attacked Washington's armory in Springfield. So my point is that democracy is supposed to be loud, it's noisy, but then you get on with some solutions. And what bothers me is that we find ourselves now with the constant polarization in terms of the dialogue, as opposed to what used to be the common principle: we'll have the discussion, we'll have the argument, then we'll find the solution. Now, the political reward seems to be just saying no. And it seems to be reinforced in the political lexicon of daily activity. Social media pumps it up and oftentimes amplifies it beyond reality. But members of Congress now more and more tend to subscribe to that principle because it's easier to go back home and tell people you voted no. The real good legislators are the ones that voted yes in the end and got the solution. Let me just give you a quick description of what the Ways and Means Committee does. It is still the perch in Congress where members would give their second child to get on that committee, which gives me leverage on the Democratic side as to who's getting on that committee. So we do all tax, trade, tariffs, Social Security, Medicare, the tax side of Medicaid, management of the public debt, pensions, and welfare. And it's a small committee. So we have broad authority. And I use that authority during my time as chairman on the infrastructure bill, on the CHIPS Act, on the Inflation Reduction Act, on Secure 2.0, postal reform, all of it. I thought that this is your opportunity, you've got the gavel, and we're going to do something. So 2 months ago, which is worth noting as well, 2 months ago, The Economist magazine, which I'm faithful to, and the Financial Times, which I read every day, they said the American economy was the envy of the world. The envy of the world. This discussion, debate, and argument that we're having in Washington now about tariffs, it's about the system that America built in the world. We built the global system. And it's created extraordinary wealth for members of the American family. That does not mean that it's been across the board. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that that wealth filters down to people who need it as well. But on the trade front and the tariff front, tariffs are a tax. There is nothing wrong with the threat of a tariff. There is nothing wrong with addressing trade imbalances and trade flows. It's important. But you can't drive away the people you need in NATO, in Southeast Asia, while you simultaneously are saying that you want to change the construct of the system we built. So yesterday, 2 days ago, I was sitting there for this extraordinary moment. The United States Trade Representative, who has to be confirmed by the United States Senate, and has the title of ambassadorial responsibility. I address him as Mr. Ambassador. Catherine Tai, who worked for me, she was the USTR. She was spectacular. Bob Lighthizer, a Republican, who was the USTR for Trump 1, we negotiated USMCA. He did a great job. I didn't go into that room and say he's a Republican or he's a Democrat. I went into that room saying we got to get a deal. The president threatened to take us out of NAFTA, and Speaker Pelosi said, you've got to figure out how to get us through this. We negotiated, and I know there are representatives of the Canadian government here today. The Canadian government, they're our friends. They're our allies. They sent troops to Iraq and Afghanistan with us, even if they might have been dubious about it. The Mexican government, President Lopez Obrador, I negotiated with him in Mexico City. I negotiated with Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada. We reached an agreement on USMCA. Here's the number you want to think of. 195 Democrats voted for the agreement. 194 Republicans voted for the agreement. The United States Chamber of Commerce endorsed the agreement. The Teamsters Union and the AFL-CIO endorsed the agreement. And it's supposed to be subject to review next year anyway. So at the time, President Trump said, this is the best trade agreement in the history of the world. 2 weeks ago, he said it was the worst trade agreement in the history of the world, after lauding it and signing it. Now, the reason for that I call attention to that, it's because when you enter trade negotiations and tariff negotiations, you need to make sure your position is sound. So at the Ways and Means Committee, with the U.S. Trade Representative sitting there 2 days ago, who's a decent guy, He is making the argument defending the president's tariffs. Now, there must be a new group in America. We're not quite sure where they meet. They're called Republicans for Tariffs. Because I've yet to meet any of them, I can tell you that. Back to Ronald Reagan's position that tariffs were harmful. Threatened tariffs. Sometimes it works. But what we've done to drive people away was highlighted by the USTR sitting there. We're questioning him. Our plan was to question him aggressively. But he is making the argument, and while he's making the argument without being told at 1:18 p.m., the tariffs are suspended for 90 days. And then, by the way, even by Washington's spin, pretty good. He said, well, we've been discussing that. And how about the president's position? It's part of the negotiation. It's not part of the negotiation. It's this manner of which we use impulsive decision-making to drive people away. So for the 90-day period now, all that means is more suspense. Still trying to figure out how you're going to get an agreement. I still haven't figured out what Liechtenstein has done to offend us. I just don't understand it. So now, in conversation, this is going to be the real challenge with China. There are trade distortions. They're to be negotiated. That's the argument that we should be offering, trying to find an agreement. You know, when you look at these considerations, you have to understand what self-interest is. And I understand this idea we want to level the playing field, but our economies are also intertwined. And that's happened for the better part now of 30 plus years. So I think that we ought to be able to reach an agreeable accommodation, but not ratcheting it up every hour of the day. Where I think this morning I said to the staff, I think JP Morgan, they're going to report their earnings at 8:30. And then I said, but I don't know what the tariffs are going to be at 10 o'clock. Because now the threat is up to 180%. It's not going to work. So we should be trying to figure out how we keep NATO on our side. I favor, you should know, a multilateral trade agreement with Europe. The Port of Boston, Logan Airport, you wouldn't want a trade agreement? Lisa's here. You know what this means for economic growth. And much of the growth that's taken place here has been because of sensible trade policy over these years. When I look at what's happening in the discussion now, we're going to move on to tax. That's always a precarious, as you know, discussion and deliberation. So the argument that we're about to have is not about a new tax cut. It's about the continuation of existing tax cuts. So if you're to have the conversation about existing tax cuts, what has to be taken into consideration is how you're going to pay for them. So the Washington Post was good enough to carry my op-ed last week. And you should know, before I did the op-ed, 3 Treasury secretaries were on the phone with me as I questioned them and they questioned me as we put it together. Because that's the kind of evidence you want. I mean, they have some knowledge of it, having sat there at different intervals. Jack Lew, Bob Rubin, Janet Yellen, they're all on the phone with me. And we put together an op-ed piece that has been pretty well received. Even George Will has said some good things about it. But what it means is, if we're going to change the baseline of the tax discussion, which our colleagues on the other side are doing, what that means is, when you change the baseline, that means you forget about what you did in the past. I don't know how you can say we're going to borrow $4 trillion to cut taxes while simultaneously complaining about the public debt. I haven't figured out the magic of that yet. So we intend to challenge them on tax. A colleague of mine on the Ways and Means Committee, a very decent guy, he said on the floor, well, our tax cut will be for a family of 4, $1,700, to which I said, we'll take it. Right now, we'll agree to that. What we're going to disagree with is who gets the tax cuts at the very top. And, you know, one of the things that was fascinating about these tax deliberations over the years, it's been that most wealthy people were not asking for tax cuts. They were saying, look, we want stability in the system. So we're going to borrow this money now to pay for these tax cuts. So that means, based on the budgetary guidelines that were adopted yesterday in a narrow vote, we were missing 3 members because of deaths. And in the deliberation yesterday, they're suggesting that they have to find $1.8 trillion of federal cuts. So we're not going to go along with cutting NIH. You can be sure of that. That was a bipartisan agreement. Clinton, Bush, you go right down the list, they all said the same thing: expand NIH dollars. We are not going to go along with cutting Medicare. You should know that. Medicare is an earned benefit. It's the only system where you are assumed to retire at 65. They just assume it. It's a great club. You join it because you paid into it your entire life, with the outcome being predictable. There is nobody 300 years old getting a Social Security check. You wonder what's happened to the dialogue and the debate when you hear that sort of a statistic. Social Security's error rate is less than 0.5%. 0.5%. And I know there are people here who were commenting this morning to me on the WEP issue, how quickly that was addressed and the checks went out. If there's fraud in Social Security, it's that much, and that's what the U.S. Attorney's Office is for. Now, let's get to the really hard one, Medicaid. When President Johnson signed the Medicare and Medicaid Act 60 years ago, and Mr. Roosevelt signed Social Security 90 years ago, and remember, Medicare and Medicaid, there are amendments to the Social Security Act. How would America have ever lived without those agreements? Here's the reality of Medicaid. Every child in Massachusetts has health insurance. That's an applause line, by the way. Thanks to all of you. So here's the differential. Medicare was seen as an earned benefit when Johnson signed it. Medicaid was perceived to be for poor children. Well, guess what's happened? Medicaid has now become long-term care. More than 50 cents on the Medicaid dollar is for long-term care. So that means in Massachusetts, $117,000 a year for long-term care at a facility. How can you pay for that? So when they say they're going to not cut Medicaid, if you don't cut Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, or national defense spending, or veterans benefits, there's not a lot of room left in the federal discussion. So we're all curious as to whether or not this is going to take us back to President Reagan, who moved forward with these big tax cuts, and then to his credit, a year later said they were too big, revisited them, and walked them back. But you know what? The cuts never took place in spending. President Bush, 2001, 2003, $1.3 trillion in 2001, $1 trillion more in 2003. 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, 1.5 million new veterans, defense spending at $850 billion now, and headed toward $1 trillion from what the president said this week. He wants to go to $1 trillion of defense spending. I don't know how you do that with tax cuts. But it does allow you to say, we're for tax cuts, and then complain about the national debt. What I'm trying to get people to focus on is that in a place like Medicaid, it has transformed America because of access. I have been more skeptical of some government interventions, but here's where I'm not skeptical. Our argument on the Democratic side should be universal access. Get them in the door. There's nothing wrong. We can argue about the expenditure, but get them in the door. So here's the numbers you want to look at as well. More than half the revenue at all these great hospitals, which, by the way, in Boston are the best in the world. If you've got a sick child anywhere in the world, you're coming to Boston. We need to defend that just as we defend the Pacific Northwest and the growth that they have. Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, 12,000 employees, 69% of their revenue is government, Medicare and Medicaid. The Sisters of Providence in Springfield, 79% of their revenue is Medicare and Medicaid. How are you going to keep the lights on in Lawrence and Lowell without that revenue? And Medicare has changed our lives. Medicaid has changed our lives. So if you combine Medicare and Medicaid, and then you take, as Doctor was saying a moment ago, if you take NIH dollars, we're the 14th largest state in the country, second largest recipient of NIH dollars, but the highest per capita recipient of those dollars. Now, why does that happen? It's because of the universities we have and the hospitals we have. That's where the money comes from. And it's a great expenditure. And I was so pleased with your description of what it meant to have a diagnosis of leukemia in the 50s. Compare that with what it is today. Chances are pretty good that child's going to make it. That's because of what happened in this city over all of those years. Now, the next issue I want to touch upon is, it's an issue we've argued about throughout our 250 plus or 300 years, and it's immigration. So I've been a champion of immigration. My grandparents were immigrants. And the point that I make on it is that we have to distinguish between legal immigration and illegal immigration. We need immigrants. And 90% of the immigrants that are here, as we call them, the undocumented, they obey the law, they pay attention, and I don't know what the meatpacking houses in the Midwest would do without them. If they brought children here at 4 or 5 years old, we're saying the children are going to be punished. This argument that we're going to change a very important part of our DNA in America about birthright citizenship, you're born here, you're a citizen. We can have the argument about the aftermath, but let's not change the Constitution based on the emotive arguments that we are currently receiving. I also want to bring this up because I think it's important. Birth rates in America are now at 1.8% for family. Now, I know you're all saying biologically that's impossible, and guess what? You're right. But the responsibility is, how are we going to sustain economic growth without a healthy supply of immigrants? The best and smartest people in the world still want to come to America. We can't push them away. When I visited these Boston hospitals, I'm struck by where the researchers all come from. It's from all over the world. They come here because of that opportunity, but they also come here because they know that their intelligence is going to be honored and acknowledged. And it's a partnership that we've developed everywhere. So I look at this time that we're living in, when apparently facts no longer count in the discussions. I'm looking at this period of time where social media rewards disinformation. Misinformation can be an honest disagreement. Disinformation is a deliberative effort to misinform the public. And we need to dial that back in terms of the conversation. Last point, I'm going to take some questions from you. The problem that we have in the political system now is the primary system. If next year 50 congressional seats are up for grabs, and the historic norm is we should pick up 26 next year. That's the average. But the problem is the primary system now distorts all of that. So you're finding in some of these cases, if you get a 4 or 5 person primary, you get a member of Congress who's won 23, 24% of the vote. And then in the aftermath, if you have a safe congressional district, which again, if you're considering that 80% of the congressional districts are pretty safe, it's hard to say we're going to find a solution when the people that just got elected are hell-bent on not finding a solution, and there's just enough of them. So the primary system distorts the outcome, distorts the realities, and I think that the problem with it is that you, again, as I highlighted at the beginning, you're rewarded for not doing something. And some of the commentary that I hear is off the charts, some of the things that are said. And you probably don't miss it because you will never find me on the cable shows. I just think it's impossible to get deals done the next day after you've been ridiculing somebody the night before on the talk shows. And my staff, they were always smart enough to know, don't even bring it up, because I just wouldn't do those shows. I tend to go to a business opportunity in the afternoon to talk about tax, trade, tariffs, or whatever, but I don't do that choose-a-side journalism that takes place now every night across America. And it's baked into the news cycle. This has been an unusual time. And I was with some friends last night, and I can't tell you how joyous it was to be with them, just to laugh about the people that we met. But even those who we met along the way, who might not have been the best policy people, they wanted an outcome. Now people are not desirous of the outcome. So thanks to the New England Council, you've been terrific to me all of these years, and I am happy to take some questions from you. And have you been, thank you.
Whenever the congressman speaks, it's almost like a lesson in politics and in the powers of Congress. So it's always a treat for me to learn so much. Quick question, though, Congressman, I'm a little confused, is that you mentioned the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee. Extraordinary what they touch. But one thing that you mentioned is tariffs. It seems to be something that the legislative branch has given away to the executive branch, where The White House is now calling the shots on all tariffs, where they are, percentage. That was a responsibility of Ways and Means and Congress.
There's been a steady erosion of congressional authority as it relates to tariffs and tax internationally, largely because of the fact that presidents were able to use emergency powers. So the president is currently using law from 1977 that says the tariff issue is a national emergency. It is not a national emergency. And then you have what are known as Section 301 and Section 202 of national law that allows the president to declare an immediate emergency. And that's what the president is using as he simultaneously seems to walk back some of the arguments he makes in the morning about it, which change in the afternoon. But this is not a national emergency. This is the subject of negotiations. They are not cleaning our clocks on trade. We run a surplus with Australia. Then Australia runs a surplus with China. It's a hard argument to have, but I got to tell you something. This is not the way to do it. I mean, we could use a butter knife rather than a bazooka on this.
Do you think the Democrats need to redefine tariffs? It's just as an observer, we seem to be looking at the Democrats trying to oppose tariffs, but not really have a definition of where they stand on the tariffs.
You know, sometimes, though, when you're in the minority, that's an okay position. I think that what we're trying to do is remind people of who's going to pay these tariffs. You're going to pay them. And I do think that on the Democratic side, there's been a huge juxtaposition in the two political parties over my career, and it's been pronounced in the last 20 years. Wealthier people have become Democrats, I think, largely because of the cultural issues, and the more working class, they've migrated away from us, which I lament. Those are my people. And in Chicopee, Springfield, Holyoke, Pittsfield, and North Adams, they're my people. The blue collar, you know, and I'm part of their aspirations. And I've defended them, stayed with them on all of these issues. But I also think that I was using some statistical data last night, which you have to pay attention to. So Barack Obama won Ohio twice. Hillary Clinton lost it by 2. Joe Biden lost it by 2. Vice President Harris lost it by 2. I see a problem. You look at Florida. Barack Obama won it twice by 2. I'm sorry, Hillary Clinton, they lost it by 8 in Ohio. But if you go to Florida, Obama wins it twice by 2, Hillary loses it by 2, Biden loses it by 2, Vice President Harris lost it by 14. New Jersey. Joe Biden won it by 14, Vice President Harris won it by 4. I mean, you can't argue with the arithmetic of this. It means some retooling. It means rethinking this. And I worry about this because it plays out in congressional elections. So when I went to Congress, we had a majority of Democrats in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Now, they weren't Massachusetts Democrats, but they voted with you 70% of the time. And we just needed them to constitute a majority. And now those states are all red, substantially so. And I think that this challenge that we have now in the electoral map portends difficult days for us coming ahead. Texas did not turn out to be what we thought it was going to be in terms of demography. North Carolina's a better prospect, for sure, as more people from Massachusetts retire there. But the other part of it that I think is something we need to be mindful of, and you can't dismiss the statistical data that's in front of us. 25% of the African-American males voted for President Trump. 48% of the Hispanics in America voted for President Trump. And if you break that number down, I'm sure it's going to be pretty lopsided male-female. It's just my own surmising. So we have to do some retooling. I mean, we have steadily lost that aspiration of the working class American, which from Roosevelt to Clinton was our staple.
And then reading the Quinnipiac poll recently, it said the Democratic Party is favorable with the 21% of the public. 21% have a favorable impression of the Democratic Party. That would be a wake-up call, obviously, with you and your colleagues. Is there anything in the tax cut that is being proposed that you would support?
Well, I don't know what it means at the moment. That's the challenge. I've been pretty steadfast about the issues that relate to Massachusetts, as you know, taking a strong interest in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most important piece of environmental legislation in the history of the world. And you should know I resisted the Green New Deal because I thought it was an opinion. If we could just keep it amongst us. When I read Joe Biden's signature achievement was the Inflation Reduction Act, I want to scream. The Ways and Means Committee wrote that legislation. And he's a friend of mine. But when you look at that Inflation Reduction Act, $412 billion of tax credits? Wow. And the red states are going to take advantage of them. I look at the CHIPS Act. $1.2 trillion worth of infrastructure money? And a fellow here said I worked for Governor Baker. I was kidding Governor Baker at the time. I said, let me tell you, I've made you look really good, pal, with this money that's come to Massachusetts. $9 billion for infrastructure in Massachusetts. And East-West Rail, you should know, is my priority. Governor Baker was terrific on it. Governor Healey's been terrific on it. I want that done as part of the money that we brought to the state. And again, on the CHIPS Act, what state's better positioned than we are to make that investment in chip manufacturing?
And so many of the positive results of the CHIP Act are in red states.
Oh, yeah.
They're building, plants and...
Yeah. They'll all be at the
Ohio.
groundbreaking and the ribbon cutting after having voted against it.
So the Medicaid cuts that are being discussed, proposed, $800 billion, is, as you said, if you take Social Security, you take Medicare, you take Medicaid, you take defense, you take the interest on the debt, which is higher than what we spend on defense, that's about 80% of the budget. So there isn't much left of waste and fraud and abuse. So how concerned should all of the health care, whether they be health care facilities, nursing homes, be aware of the $800 billion? How is it going to?
I don't know how you make the cuts without going to the descriptions you've just offered.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be very plausible unless you use the Reagan Initiative, and that is, you tried to do the cuts, it didn't happen. Yeah. I just find it impossible to perceive that the senators from Missouri, where 1/3 of the people in Missouri receive a Medicaid benefit, are going to be able to vote to cut Medicaid. West Virginia, it's almost 40%. Medicaid. I mean, it's designed to get them unelected. I can tell you that, and they know that.
Voodoo economics?
It's more than voodoo economics. It's irresponsible. People need health care.
Questions? New England Council members first. Leroy? Just gotta keep our members. We're gonna wait. Nope. Sam's got the.
Congressman, can you say a little bit more about where we are in the reconciliation process and the likelihood that the GOP might be successful at using that to push this through?
Its reconciliation comes from 1974, and what it was intended to do originally was to reconcile expenditure with revenue. That's all it meant. We would pause halfway through the fiscal year and say, how is revenue being measured? And then it became another tool. And now it's used to get around the filibuster. And the two parties have an interesting position, as you know, on the filibuster. When they're in the majority, they hate the filibuster, and when they're a minority, they support the filibuster. It is a check on popular will. I mean, the idea was from the framers, and like a lot, it gets distorted afterwards, but the framers said they were worried about popular will. That because people make very emotive decisions that they wish they didn't make, you need to check it. Where the House would be with a 2-year term, full of emotion, bombastic. And then the Senate with a 6-year term would slow everything down. You take your time, think it through. But the filibuster is the argument now. So what the Senate is saying is they want to be able to do this with 51 votes. They're right on the edge because they've got to figure out how to craft this with 51 votes. There's no chance they can get 60. So I think on reconciliation, you're in for a pretty good discussion of the intricacies of legislative life. In that op-ed piece, I teach at UMass, and I've been there forever in Amherst, and So my students were reviewing my op-ed piece. They thought it sounded too wonky. To which I said to them, that's because I know how to use more than 3 words in a sentence.
Jamie?
State and local governments rely on the ability to issue tax-exempt debt to fund capital projects. In the tax cut debate, to what degree do you think that ability to issue tax-exempt debt is?
Well, I defend that because I came from the mayor's office. I know what it means. And by the way, with the infrastructure bill, it should be a grand time for municipal debt financing. Again, if I always say to the Chamber of Commerce members, I hope there isn't anybody in Boston who complains about infrastructure spending. Yeah, that's a good response. I mean, I had to sit there even when I was mad and watch what happened with the big dig. $22 billion, $16 billion in investment, $6 billion in interest. But the debt markets worked. It worked fine. And look at what happened in this city because of it. And the joke we used to have on the inside was we ran out of naming things for Moakley, so we had to start naming them for his wife.
And what did Joe Moakley say? My favorite bird is the crane. That crane. He loves seeing cranes
good at that,
on the
I can
seaport.
tell you.
And obviously it worked. Lenny Glenn, the only question, I mean, I understand you want to ask a question, but I have a luncheon, so keep it brief.
I think we'll make lunch. Congressman, I want to ask a purely political question. I mean, I actually think we are in an emergency, and the emergency consists of having Donald Trump as our president. Very erratic behavior. The question is why is it not possible to bring across 3 or 4 Republicans to change party? Is that utter? I mean, Shelby changed party, Arlen. Are they all going to follow him all the way off the cliff, or can we recruit them and promise not to run against them and to offer finance? Bring a couple of Republicans to our side.
We need to fracture their alliance. That's what we've got to do. We've got to get those 3 or 4. But if they're afraid of a primary and what comes from the White House, it's going to be really hard to do. The other part of what I described earlier about where we find ourselves with the base of the 2 political parties now, you really don't have a lot of country club Republicans anymore. They became independents. That's the challenge we have. They just became independents. They're not likely to sign up with us. But the suburban independent now determines the elections in Massachusetts, that 495 Beltway. You know, I mean, Charlie Baker left here with almost 2/3 approval rating. Pretty wild in a state that is the bluest in the country. But the other statistic here, Lenny, in Massachusetts that people have not paid attention to, but some of us here have, 60% of the voters now are independents in Massachusetts. And they came here from Dell, they came here from biotech, they don't tend to have the same Republican Democratic views. But the demise, I think, of what I would call suburban Republicans would have been easier to attack than it is now. Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor, Marjorie Aaron Barron.
You mentioned that the Democrats need to talk differently about tariffs. Are there 2 or 3 other issues where the messaging among Democrats is fractured between different parts of the Democratic Party or just between Democrats and Republicans? I mean, the messaging needs work.
Yeah. Part of that argument is populism in the Democratic Party. And I don't know how you're ever going to win Florida if people think that socialism is making a comeback. I mean, the Venezuelans in South Florida, the Puerto Ricans in South Florida are not for socialism. They think that what happened in their country brought them here. And it really harmed our candidate for president. They voted overwhelmingly for Trump. And so I think that's part of the discussion. I also think that we need to talk about health care differently. And that is, again, back to universal access. People need health care. And the earlier and faster you get them in, the better off we all are. Now, here's the other part of it, because you raise a great question. And I was part of the Clinton health care debate and helped to write the Affordable Care Act at the Ways and Means Committee. So the The problem we've always had with the healthcare debate on the Democratic side is there's a lot of our own members who think that we're taking something away from them to give to somebody else. The economics don't play out that way. We're all better off with the earlier we get people into healthcare for all, including costs. So I think that the Affordable Care Act has really worked as we intended. The problem with the Affordable Care Act is what we really did was to expand Medicaid. So we said to states like Ohio, we will pay 90% of your health care bill for the next 10 years at the federal level. That's a deal that we would all take in this room. But Texas hasn't taken it and Florida haven't taken it. I don't understand for the life of me why you wouldn't get those kids into health care earlier. So I think that's part of the conversation as well as we go forward. I also think that there is a split somewhat in the Democratic Party about those of us who have been really interested in legislation over the years. I mean, people that sit in the room forever, and as I noted earlier, we kind of avoid the cable shows. We avoid the charged rhetoric because we think we can get a deal. As I said with USMCA, how about retirement savings? I mean, what we built into some of that legislation, I mean, for labor, unbelievable. What we did with Davis-Bacon, what we were able to do with the Butch-Lewis Act. I mean, that Teamsters Hall over there in South Boston, we restored their pensions. But it's a hard story to have in this atmosphere. I mean, 2 million people are going to get a good night's sleep tonight because of what we did. And just share this with you because I know you like politics. You wouldn't be here. I'm standing outside the Oval Office with Speaker Pelosi, and we're going in to talk to the president about what we're going to do with the rescue package, which succeeded wildly. Now, we got that money into the hands of people who needed it, those at the lower end of the economic spectrum. We went back and searched Medicaid records if they weren't in a position to qualify for tax. There are, a lot of people who don't make $25,000, and that means you don't have to file tax forms. We went back and chased their Medicaid records and sent the money to them because they needed it for day-to-day sustenance during the pandemic. So what we were able to do, as I walked into the Oval Office with the Speaker, I said, look, Madam Speaker, I'm putting the Butch-Lewis Act in. And she said, go for it. I walk in, and I said to the president, Mr. President, I'm putting the Butch-Lewis Act in the rescue package. And the guy says to me, and I'm going to support you on it. I'm looking at Pelosi, and she's looking at me, because that's usually when a staffer jumps up and runs over to the president and says, we won't agree to that right now. But we did that for people that had played by the rules their entire lives, and we got no reward for it at election time. We lost the Teamsters vote nationwide. The laborers in Ohio, we got beat by 10 points. And this is what the problem we've got in our own party. And I think that the answer is we've got to remind people of what it is that we've done with them over the years. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. This should be a time where we were pronouncing these victories that we had. Instead, the cultural issues divide us. Not so much on the Democratic side, but they divide the American people.
Maybe one more question. Gentleman in the back. Just identify yourself. Identify yourself. So when you ask a hardball question, we all know who you are.
Hi, everyone. Doug Maney. Thank you for your time today. Following your path on the polarization and your candor earlier today, if we were at dinner last night and one of your friends asked you, what do your Republican colleagues tell you away from the cameras, and is there a hope and an appetite for a saner approach, what would you have shared with them?
I'd say I wish that people could see what they say about this moment in the elevator, privately, the eye rolls. As one said to me yesterday after the vote, as he was walking out, he goes, stay tuned for what's next. They're afraid of the primary. That's the problem. And so I think that stands in the way of many of the accomplishments that we should be undertaking. I could find an agreement with a lot of them. With a House that's virtually 50-50, you have to accommodate that. I mean, you can resist, I got it. And there are a lot of things we intend to resist on. But why would we not want to expand retirement savings? Why would they not want to defend Social Security? And it's the polarized nature of the debate on the outside that contributes to it. Yeah. Not right now, there's not. No, I think that it's this enforcement that's coming from the White House. The president runs the House of Representatives. They're scared to death. And submit something else to you because you raise a good question. In our constitutional system, members of Congress don't serve under presidents of the United States. We serve with presidents of the United States. I mean, I gave Bill Clinton a bad time on a lot of things. I gave Barack Obama a bad time on a lot of things, including retirement savings. I gave Joe Biden a tough time on things. There's just this reticence about questioning the president if you're a Republican right now, even if they don't believe it.
It's 10 o'clock, and I know
Can we
that
get Jim
some
Siegel in? 'Cause he'll be
you
mad at
want
me forever.
Siegel, and then, but you also have Andrea from Work Inc., so you're going to have to do both. Andrea, ask your question. Here's the mic. Andrea's with Work Inc., which is an extraordinary organization located in Dorchester. But what they do for people with disabilities and getting them in.
And it looks great.
Only because of the Congress.
Thank
Andrea,
you,
quick-
Congressman. Speaking of the
Go
Springfield
ahead.
Federal Courthouse, the Ability One program, it seems like everything today is on the chopping blocks or could be on the chopping block. What types of things can we do to ensure that programs like the Ability One program that's been around since 1938 stays consistent, employs about 40,000 people with disabilities throughout the United States? So for agencies like mine and others across the country, what do we need to do to ensure that that stays?
You need to remind people of why it's worked. This universal condemnation now of what government does is not only unwarranted, it's ill-conceived. I mean, people show up in some of these agencies and the doors are locked. Their admission cards are rejected. They don't know if they're going to have a paycheck next week. It's cruel. And for people like you, I just did, just a quick reminder, in East Hampton, Massachusetts, it's people that are developmentally challenged. 300. You know what, when you go through there, I'm watching people that have these severe handicaps, but they're learning as knives and forks come out of the dishwasher, just how to place them in the retainer. You know why? Because they're going to work at the University of Massachusetts. Are we going to forget about that? Then the parents get to go to work every day. And the advocates are there. I sat and did a round table with them. You walk out of there and you say to yourself, so how grateful we should be that that happens. Because of people that just through birth had this affliction. And so stick with it, because we intend to continue to be supportive. And a lot of that support comes from Social Security disability, right? I mean, and the other part of it, since you raised it, we shouldn't have some 24-year-old pouring through your Social Security records either. You know, saying they're with Doge, they would not have had a good morning in Springfield, I can tell you that. But so stay with it.
Okay, last question. James Siegel.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for coming, Rich. And apparently Republicans are afraid to come to meetings like this, so that's also something about today. You've mentioned debt a lot, federal debt I'm talking about. We have billions and probably trillions of dollars to roll over and to issue new. We've alienated every country in the world except Russia at this point. Who's going to buy the debt?
Yeah. Well, you know, my own thought is that's really what happened with the president over the tariffs. That might be Secretary Bessent who tried to take the credit for it when he stepped outside. I can only imagine what those conversations were like. But my sense is that they saw what was happening with treasuries, they saw what was happening with debt, and they saw what was happening to the American dollar. You know, again, based on the system, John is shaking his head, based on the system we built, the American dollar is everything. Everything. And trying to roll over that debt for people that are angry with you would not be easy. And still, I always say this to folks no matter where I go, where have you ever been in the world where they didn't take the American dollar before you made the transaction? If you've got it, you generally have. In Jerusalem one time, a kid was making change for me. You know, you go to a bank to change currency, there's no questions asked, because they know we're going to redeem that dollar and we're going to pay our debts. So that I really think that's between the stock market and debt and the dollar. That's what changed their minds at the White House. It's going to be really hard, and it's going to get worse with China in the next few days.
Well, with that upbeat assessment, I just want to thank the Congress. But let me just also say what I marvel about the Congressman is his legislative skills. If you ever watched him in Ways and Means, when he proposed any tax provision or any other issue, he would get every Republican on that committee to support him, which is extraordinary. You don't read that in the paper. But he wouldn't bring something to the committee unless he really worked it one-on-one with people on the other side of the aisle, because he respects their input. He respects their opinion. So when he brings that bill to the Ways and Means full committee, it's usually unanimous. That's unheard of. That's a legislative skill that we miss, and we're very fortunate to have it. And the dean here, and I can't say enough about him, but he's there for the right reason. He wants to do good, and he wants to move the dial and address some of these, convoluting issues and try to find consensus. And no one better to do it than our dean.
Right. What I do with the Republicans on tax bills, because they can't be for it in public, I will say, okay, we're going to do a voice vote.
No fingerprints.
We won't have a roll call vote. Just vote for it. That's all.
Okay, if you want a photo with the Congressman, come up and we'll do some quick